Well, I'd like just to talk a little bit more about Les Poissons Rouges, because I know there's quite a few people here that are involved in classical music presentation, and I think what Ronan and his team have done is fairly remarkable in terms of the kind of classical music they do too. I think one of the things that I just wanted to sort of stress was that it's very rigorous programming. I mean, they do like the complete Ligeti string quartets, but it's in a very, it's a listening environment, and I think a respectful listening environment, but with a different tone. And it's that tone that makes the difference for the audience. And I think it has developed into a place with the kind of identity for that, which I think we all aspire to, is that people say, let's go to Les Poissons Rouges. What's on? Well, I think it's going to be another classical show. They may not know exactly what it is, but they want to be there because they want to be identified with that kind of space and that kind of atmosphere. And it's a real turning point. I think I hear a lot of people, and I'm not a classical music presenter myself, but I know people struggle with, like, how do we find that new audience? And I think that this is definitely an indicator of success in that realm.
And also, Ronan, so we're seeing actually audiences that are what we would call "quote unquote" crossover. They'll do jazz, they'll come to classical.
You're saying artists?
No, the audiences.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it can change. You know, I mean, when we have 12 to 15 events a week, so some weeks it could be 12 to 15 distinct audiences. It could be 3 or 4 that kind of overlap. I mean, for my part, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a relative latecomer to classical music, and for me, one of the real revelations was that, to anyone who has spent even a couple of minutes listening to, the semi-popular or not so popular music of the last 10 or 15 years, people like Radiohead, people like Bjork, people like the Talking Heads and Grizzly Bear and Sigur Rós and the Arcade Fire. These are all groups that have not only kind of assimilated the history of rock music and and really jazz music and experimental music, but the the stuff that really gets those bands going the most is Steve Reich. It's not maybe the Rolling Stones anymore, and it's a bit of a leap. I think that someone who loves Radiohead may not necessarily take to Messiaen or Bartok the first time, but it's all pretty documented that Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead says his 2 biggest influences growing up were New Order and Leskosky. And so when we did a concert of Johnny Greenwood's music, we put Leskosky and we put Bartok and we put Messiaen on before. And the idea is, if you like this kind of music, here's a respectful suggestion for something else you might like. And it's kind of a necessity in New York because there's you could go every single night to a different venue. You could never repeat twice in a year. And really all that distinguishes you is kind of the consistency of your choices. And, some nights are certainly stronger than others, I would say, but we very self-consciously tried to make it so that if you saw a jazz show, it was Anthony Braxton or Brad Mehldau or Dave Douglas. If you saw a classical show, it was Bang in a Can or the Emersons or Hilary Hahn. And just trying not to think about genre, but really just to get good musicians, period.
Great, thank you. Bob Wetzel?
Well, I keep hearing from this panel and in this discussion that we have to make these arts facilities the public face, if you will, of the institutions, and we have to listen to the audience. Why have we, though, so historically treated the audience so badly? I mean, why have we really ignored them? Because I'm hearing you talk about the fact that we have to go back at Penn State and recreate the facility, for example, and God knows we're going to have to do that here, to address the audience that we've never, but why didn't we ever listen to the audience?
Let's do that. Duncan?
Okay. I'll take it. We used to. I think there was a period of time in this country when this was a younger country and when the arts, participating in the arts, became about defining yourself as a sophisticated person. We were insecure, and we used the arts as a means to give ourselves credence and confidence as a nation. And so the place of the arts became a palace, and the experience of going to the arts was one of awe and reverence. And along the way, the audience sort of lost their role. That's one idea.
Paul?
Well, I think there's kind of a demographic crisis because the question is, you know, where are the younger audiences? So, I mean, that's a shift, at least for a lot of the older cultural institutions. You know, how do you get people under age 45 to be in the audiences? It's easy to do at Dartmouth or on a campus, but go off of a campus and where are those younger audiences? And, you know, I don't know that you had that crisis before, but that's the crisis most of our clients face. It's kind of the demographic of the audience and how do you change that? But I think also, as people have pointed out, you know, the technology's had a role. And I think the most important thing that was said was that the attention span has changed. I'm on the board of the Cleveland Orchestra, and I think my wife had one of the great ideas of the last several years. She said, why do we have to why do we sit through a concert for 2.5 hours? You know, starting at 8, ending at 10:30. You can't really have a dinner before. You can't afterwards. You can't socialize. She said, can we do a concert that starts at 7, is less than 2 hours long, no intermission, have a party beforehand, and have, you know, world music afterwards, and carry on. Every one of those has been sold out. The demographic is very different. And the board can't believe it. It's like, you know, what happened? It's the same audience, it's the same community, but suddenly they get a totally different reaction. So what does it tell you? You know, it's attention span, and it's that you've got to have a social event, and you've got to have diversity in the offering.
Thank you. Sylvia? And then we'll go to Ben. And then...
I would even add that it is all of what you've just said and perhaps even more complex, especially as we think about engaging campus communities that are trying to foster some not only intellectual engagement, but artistic engagement. And I say that because of the recognition that systems are designed to kind of have the results that they do. So if we continue to have our practice be the same, we will engage the same people. But at the same time, the campus community is a different constituent. So if I just do a snapshot of Dartmouth, now, this year, more than 35% students of color, 11% first-generation students who don't just come comfortably to the theater, always. Maybe some do, maybe some don't. And I think, you know, as a former performer myself, waiting for the audience to come to me is no longer going to work. And to communicate to that audience in the ways that have been successful in the past is not going to work. So this wonderful idea of transparency, where the edges are blurred between performance space and psychological space for performance, is intriguing, because I think that's the link. And students also increasingly tell us, perhaps this is the link, that they want to see themselves represented somewhere on a campus, whether it's in art or you know, performance art, or in literature, or in their coursework, or in the sculptures that are on a campus. They're looking for themselves. It's developmentally appropriate. And that may be on college campuses the hook for those other audiences, this new audience who starts with themselves and then goes on to exploring issues and ideas that they never thought they would have access to.
Great, thank you. Ben Cameron?
This is for Ronan, actually, because I came to see Zul Bailey do the Bach cello suites at Poisson Rouge, and part of, in reference to your earlier question about business models, that I thought was really smart is you really have a sort of bifurcated business model, because you said tickets are only $10 or $15, but there's a food minimum that's another $15 or $20 as well. The food is outstandingly good.
I have to pay my rent.
Yeah, no. But the food is outstandingly good, but even if I don't like the music, I walk away saying, hey, you know, I got a drink and really good food for $15. I don't mind the rest, as opposed to in most performing arts, we place all the eggs and then we paid $30 for a concert and we didn't like the music. So you walk away feeling resentful. I'm just saying it's interesting to me about the bifurcated value. I guess my question for you, though, is now that you're in the space, I was struck by, at least at Zul Bailey, how much of the concert was his interaction with the audience and articulation of how he thought as a musician, how he played, how he interpreted certain notations in the music in a way I'd never seen anybody do before. I'm curious, A, do most artists take advantage of the room dynamics in a different way than they would in a traditional venue? And B, are there things in the space that you have found don't work or are drawbacks to your programming in a way that you'd hunger for a different alternative space?
To answer your first question, it's certainly true that a lot of artists, when they come in, they, very self-consciously will come up with a program that is different from what they're doing at Carnegie Hall and Alice Tully Hall. We had a young organist named Cameron Carpenter play the venue last week, and there's an hour in between when doors open and the show starts, and most artists, spend that hour in the green room just practicing or unwinding, but Cameron spent the entire time going to each and every audience member and introducing himself and saying, "My name is Cameron, thank you for coming, have you seen me before? There's a CD back there, here's a postcard." Alan Kozin made a joke in the Times. He said, "You almost got the feeling that if you asked him for a beer, he would have brought you one," which based on after the show, I can say that's probably true. But at the same time, there are people who come, and it's kind of just the facts. They'll sit down at the piano, they'll play an hour program, and they'll go. And it's really fine with us either way. We are very fortunate in that we have gotten a reputation as a place that does new music, that does experimental music, but I sort of always have to remind people that the second night we were open, the pianist Simona Dinnerstein played the Goldberg Variations complete. We've had, week-long runs of Monteverdi operas and, the Bach cello suites and sopranos from the Met singing Mozart and Verdi. I personally, I think that we're maybe a little more traditional than people give us credit for. My kind of foremost goal, is to have someone like Richard Good playing Schubert there at 11 o'clock, or have Emanuel Ax play there. And I get very funny reactions when I tell artist managers this, because they say, "You would really want Emanuel Ax to play Schubert at your club?" And I say, why do I even have to explain this? Like, this is... your second question, remind me, was just about...
To the space or things that don't work.
Oh, it's kind of this weird calculus of, there are shows that I will put on the calendar that I'll think it's going to be me and the 3 bartenders and the security guy, and that will be something like the complete Xenakis quartets, and there will be 350 people there. Alternatively, there will be, nights where we'll book maybe younger pianists, kind of up-and-coming people who do play Carnegie Hall and the Library of Congress, but there's, for some reason, some nights, there's maybe a smaller audience than they could be, and we wonder to ourselves, if this person performed at Carnegie Hall, their audience would probably be 10 times bigger than it is. Maybe, it's just his particular audience, maybe it's just his particular following, or just in New York, you never know. You could do the same concert the next night, and there could be twice as many people.
Great, thank you. Just 2 quick questions, then we're going to go. Jenny?
It's just more...
Use the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. It's really just more a comment that when you imagine, let's say, doing 2 performances in one evening where it goes into the later hours, which sort of triggers something very different in the audience, this sort of kind of speakeasy sort of experience, and then you look at the density of work that you do, what you have is sort of an ongoing sort of marathon or festival kind of density, and I think that also begins to train audiences and people to just give themselves over to something, because it's not all of their expectations are bundled into one expensive, focused evening. And I think, much the way people create work by throwing a lot on the floor, so to speak, metaphorically, I think presenters who are able to, throw a lot of work out there find that there's less sort of caught up in that big, finished, done and dusted presentation. And audiences seeing that, having exposure to it, not being so wedded to the one-off, will begin to relax into the volume and become a little bit more receptive and follow that lead. So I sort of applaud those qualities of your programming that release people to a different experience.
Colleen?
Jerry, my question's for the architects and the theater managers and Steve and Chuck and their conceptual drawings. I made a comment to Thomas when he got done with his presentation, and I said, well, you know, how do you know a building is successful? You've done the questions, you've done the mission work, how do you know that? And he says, it takes about 5 years. So my question to you is, are there evaluation points that you look at when you work with your client or go back to your client and getting to that success and reevaluating that building in 5 years? And are there physical changes or programmatical changes that can make a facility the success you hoped it to be in the beginning?
Who wants to take that?
Just one note about that. I mean, our building, which is done by a postmodernist architect, who's actually his first public building, is not without its sort of architectural challenges that it faces. And my black box performance space certainly has that. It has no right angles. It's got some other kind of strange characteristics. But you know, one of the things that I found, and again, this is sort of also driven by our mission and the kind of work that we do, but the fact that we don't have fixed seats, that I could create formats to really respond to the way that we do work, that I could present work with seated on a riser to do dance and theater or these kinds of things, but I could also set it up in a kind of a cabaret style to do both new music and jazz and serve drinks, or that I could do standing room indie rock shows and bring in Grizzly Bear or Dirty Projectors for $5.50 standing. I could not do that well in a space with fixed seating. And those kinds of flexibilities, and so those kinds of success measures about adaptability, and also institutionally, how can you create different timelines? In other words, if I start a show at 9 o'clock and I have to have the whole building open to that, can the institution adapt to those kinds of programmatic needs? I think those are real important kind of factors in looking on your success.
I'm going to actually have to call this panel over a little bit over time, so maybe one last one. Steve, you want to go? Or who wants to do this? Paul? Or Duncan?
Yeah. So it's great that architects have a point of view on operational success, but the reality in a lot of these buildings, it takes a few years to play out, and the success of the building has littler to do with the physical choices that were made and much more to do with the relationships between the building managers and the groups that use them. We're working now in a strategic plan for a building that opened 2 years ago. Great story. It's a recycled building. They did everything right, saved tons of money. 2 years later, it's a disaster. The relationships are so toxic between the building and the resident users and Broadway that no amount of strategic planning and analysis and data collection on our part is going to fix it. Ultimately, success in buildings is about these guys, about Chuck Swanson and you guys who are have to be so good at managing a very complicated set of relationships around, especially on campuses, around students and faculty and users and touring programs. It's a masterful job, and there aren't that many people who are good at it.
Okay. Paul, you want to respond?
I'll just make it brief, but I think we've learned a lot from Duncan on, in terms of the value of connecting to communities, because the kind of the rental house kind of presenting model has changed a lot. But you know, sometimes when you really, and I think a lot of what we've learned is people tend to overbuild in terms of seating, and the places look like they're going out of business. It's not that they are, but they really look like it. You know, I think the business model's clearly changed, but connecting to community seems to be, you know, the great and important formula. And then the final thing is, you know, this thing about this monolithic, you know, you come there for the 2.5-hour performance and the intermission. I wouldn't rely on that. I mean, I think that it's got to be part of an experience, which is why you're succeeding. And, you know, it's not a 7:45 to, you know, 10:15 experience. It's got to be a very diverse evening. And I think that you have to rely on income other than, you know, just the performances on stage. I mean, you have to become a place of desire for the community, a destination. And you have to become the place to be that everybody wants to rent and everybody wants to party. So I think people focus on the wrong metrics. It's the performance and a lot of seats, and that's not what creates success.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Bill.